Welcome to this special evening, which I've been looking forward for a while now. My name is Rogaia Seck. I'm program editor here at the Balie, and I organized this event together with Dutch Culture and the Geus publisher. Our special guest tonight is Johny Pitts, writer, photographer, TV presenter, much more, I guess, who set off on a journey across Europe in search for an Afropean identity, resulted in the book Afropean, Notes from Black Europe, which is now translated into Dutch als Afropean, Notities uit Zwart Europa. 2 years ago, we invited Johny for a forum on European culture, which resulted into a photo exhibition in Foam Museum and a talk also in the museum. For this event, the Geus invited Johny to go to Amsterdam because of the translation. So we are really happy that we can keep on making this conversation, this ongoing conversation with Johny about this Afropean identity. If there's something as an Afropean identity, I think we come pretty close to it tonight because we're having guests from Antwerp, London, Malmö, Brussels, Rotterdam, and Groningen. With roots in Liberia, Senegal, Mali, Rwanda, Curaçao, and Nigeria. So let's start quickly by giving Johny Pitts a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Rogaia. It's great to be here with you again and be invited to Amsterdam, which was a really key moment for me as I was writing the book and learning so much from Mitchell and Jessica at the Black Archives. It was a real turning point in the book for me where I think the book became maybe more political, not just cultural. But I would like to read... I don't want to assume that most people here have read the book yet, so I'd like to read a very short passage from the beginning of my book, where I've just left the UK and I'm entering Paris. And I should mention that this book was written before the referendum was even really on the agenda, you know. So it's amazing how much things have changed. In the political structures and how this notion of Afropean feels more important to me than ever before, because while the realms of officialdom seem to be falling apart, this translocal idea that lives outside of these official spaces feels to me stronger than ever, and I feel as connected to this notion of Afropean as I ever did before. So just a short reading here as I pull into the Gare du Nord. As the Eurostar pulled into the cavernous entrance of the station at dusk, I sat back for a moment and watched the same commuters I'd seen elegantly sipping their Sauvignon Blancs and black coffees just a moment ago lose their grace, awkwardly pushing, struggling with baggage and queuing up to dash out onto the platform. They had families to catch up with, friends to see, business to attend to and parties to schmooze at, the things I was about to opt out of for a few months. Having no obligations should have been a pleasant feeling, I suppose, and yet, sitting there alone on the Eurostar, rain droplets on the windows disfiguring the platform beyond them, and West African cleaners as shadow-like as Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, taking the place of those well-heeled commuters I'd just seen alight, I experienced the kind of trepidation people often have before setting out on a long journey. It suddenly struck me that what lay before me was an empty, disquieting expanse of loneliness and uncertainty. That I'd just entered a geographic landmass in which I would be a foreigner in every capacity. Was there really a cohesive idea of a black Europe I might be able to find some sort of solidarity with? Everything suddenly struck me as an abstraction. Who was black? What was Europe? With a sense of foreboding pulling me back into my seat, I sat for a few minutes until I must have been the last passenger on the train, surrounded by the remnants left behind by my former travelling companions. Empty crisp packets, mini bottles of wine rolling on their side, and tables stained with coffee rings. And learned the lesson of slowing down in order to tap into a new big city frequency. Various tempos reveal different realities, and very often Europe's black workforce inhabits the liminal terrain I'd just experienced as cleaners, taxi drivers, porters, security guards, ticket sellers and nightclub bouncers. They are there and not there. I knew of this world already, of course, because I'd been a part of it in the past, but had never before thought about it as an invisible world through which white Europe blithely passes without ever really seeing.
Thank you so much. So the journey you made, it was already 10 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, about,
Yeah. And so how do you involve this project? It's on.
How did I evolve the project? Yeah, I kind of did it in a way that was kind of back to front. So instead of doing a load of research before setting out on the journey, I set out working with intuition and did the research afterwards. So that's why it took so long. It was published in 2019 for the first time. I did a lot of research, 4 or 5 years of research after the fact, making sense of the everyday conversations I was having, trying to place those conversations in history, you know. So yeah, that's the way that I evolved it was kind of, I mean, I had no money really. I just had like a couple of £1,000 I'd saved up for. I had to stay in hostels and on people's sofas from the online community I'd set up. I had no publisher. I had no formal training as a photographer. And so everything was very off the cuff, and I was, using kind of my wits and intuition and trying to basically wander Europe, trying to make friends, you know, trying to go to communities that resonated with my own experience, because I grew up on the outskirts of a city, working class, multicultural, and really the journey was a trip through all these kinds of areas in Europe, places like Clichy-sous-Bois, Belma, Matonge, places that resonated with my own experience growing up in the UK. As somebody who feels both of and not of Europe, that feels of and not of Africa, feels somewhere in between.
Why of and not of Africa? Can you explain that?
There are a few reasons why. And the first reason is that Africa was stolen from me. You know, all the research leads me to believe that my family were owned by a Bristolian slave trader called Robert Pitts. He was from Bristol in the UK, and so my family were taken across the Middle Passage. We think via Charleston in South Carolina. Just to show how sort of recent all this stuff is. My grandma, my father's quite an old. My father's almost old enough to be my grandfather, but my grandma was a sharecropper. You know, my grandma picked cotton until the age of 14, and then ran away as part of the Great Migration in 1930 to Brooklyn, where she worked as a maid for a Jewish family, and then would go on to raise my father. So my father could, I always think of this, Teju Cole, you know, the writer and photographer, always talks about how Brooklyn is one of the world's great African cities, you know, and what he's getting at there is if you're black and from Brooklyn, Brooklyn is black, and there's a long history of culture there, partly built out of the South, built out of that Great Migration. I was brought up then in Europe. And didn't know exactly where I was from. You know, I couldn't identify with African American culture like my dad did. I was raised in this weird hybrid place between, I would say, African American culture on the one hand in the home. So a lot of the movies and the music and the stories were African American in the home, but out on the streets it was more Jamaican. And I don't have Jamaican heritage, but that was the predominant Black British identity, certainly locally anyway. And so I identified with the Jamaican community, but it was never really my own. And so for me, I had to think outside of Britain for a start. I had to think of outside of America. And I thought, well, where could I find a sort of an identity I could sort of anchor myself to? Where, you know, I feel like there's strength in numbers. And so I thought, well, what if each of us who are connected somehow to the legacy of colonialism, who are connected to Africa but living in Europe, what if we could sort of somehow, even for those people who do feel they're rooted to their heritage, they're Ghanaian but living in London, or Surinamese and living in Amsterdam, I think we'd do well to talk to each other and try and build a kind of a cultural foundation that transcends borders of blackness.
Did you manage to do so?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. Did I manage to do so? Within the book, yes, I think so. And the legacy of the book actually has been a very connective one. You know, it's connected. I mean, talks like this have happened because of the book. But
for yourself?
Yeah, for myself, absolutely. You know, I mentioned at the start, you know, as Europe seems to be crumbling in some ways, the notion of Europe. The idea of Afropean, which has never been overly reliant on spaces of officialdom, to me has been a great, net. You know, it's that as everything seems to be falling apart, there does feel to me to be some solidarity within the Black communities in Europe. I certainly have felt that way. Yeah.
So let's invite Lisette Ma Neza on stage. Yeah. Poet, musician, writer, filmmaker. Please take the mic.
Thank you.
And last time you saw Johny was 2 years ago at Foam Museum. During the event, you did a performance or several performances. And afterwards, you got inspired to also follow the book, follow Johny's footsteps through Europe. What made you go?
Yeah, actually, when you were just talking about 2 years ago you were here, I was thinking, wait, that's when it started, when the research started for me. For I had to read the book for my performance, and while I was reading it, I was thinking, I live in the Netherlands, I live in Belgium, I speak a few European languages, but I've never thought of myself as a European at all. And then reading through it and thinking about, oh, maybe I can find places where I feel home in Europe, and maybe I can feel like this continent has something to do with me in a way. So then I remember meeting you, and I was like, the first thing you said was you saw something about the article that I wrote about the book, and then the first thing I said was, yeah, and I love it so much. I want to do the same travels as you. And you said, yeah, that's what I wrote the book for. I was like, I want to use it as a guide. You were like, yeah, that's why I wrote the book.
And where did that journey take you?
I first it was COVID. It was COVID times. I couldn't travel at all. And then at some point it was possible. And then I literally followed it as my guide. And then by serendipity, by faith, I also landed in different other places.
And do you think what kind of experiences from the book did you recognize during your trip?
What kind of experiences I recognized?
Yeah, the experience from Johny's story.
Well, sometimes it was very similar. Sometimes it was literally the same person that I would find, but in another city or in another country.
What are you talking about? Same person in another city?
Celia from the Nubians. He writes about her in the book, and on it's a singer with her sister. And then when I was in Paris, the first night of the first trip, I was with a friend who also read the book, and he's like, "Hey, there's Celia. You have to talk to her. She's in the book." I'm like, "What?" And then I interviewed her with Absa as well, the visual artist of the scenography, because we made a show out of it with poetry, music, visual art. But we interviewed her, and it was really special. It was really about transmission, I feel like. Yeah.
And were the things different? Because Johny was talking about sleeping on sofas and in cheap hotel rooms or hostel rooms. How was it for you as a woman traveling through Europe?
It was a difference, yes. It's one of the first thing I realized was, he wrote about his experiences as a traveler, someone who's seeking for his source, his identity. And I could recognize myself in that as well. But very soon I realized, but I am a woman, and sometimes I would read in the book. Then I met a kind of brother of mine. He brought me to this place and this place. But sometimes when I was on the streets and I was meeting a kind of brother of mine, I was approached in a very different way. It was more like, "Hey lady, what are you up to?" And then I would be like seeking for the same experience, but not feeling safe enough sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. And did you also thought about it, Johny, about your Afropean experience, that it was also a male experience?
Not particularly as I was traveling. It was only when I got back. I just split up with my long-term girlfriend before going, and then when I got back, I was sort of trying to get her back. We're back together now. We have 2 children, and one of my daughters is called Celia, named after Celia from the Nubians. But I was trying to get her back, and I was saying, I was trying to tell her these stories exciting stories of where I'd been, and I was telling her about being in Moscow, and I said it was quite frightening in Moscow, and I couldn't, when I was at the embassy, they said I shouldn't go out at night, I should avoid certain spaces, and I was trying to I could tell I was almost trying to impress her with my bravery, being in Moscow. It seems embarrassing to admit that, but she just sort of rolled her eyes and said, "Well, what do you think the experience is like for women almost everywhere? We have to think about." Be careful about going out at night alone. We have to think about certain spaces. We have to do that in so many other places, not just Moscow. And so that's when I really realized that, of course, like my journey is encoded into that journey is definitely a male experience. Actually, I wasn't trying to make it that. I was trying to be as open as possible. And many people I meet, a big part of the Amsterdam chapter is speaking to Jessica Dabro from the Black Ark. So it's not just that I'm only meeting with men, but certainly, and actually hearing Lisette and the way she talks about her own journey and the differences, to me I find really powerful, because it shows you. Well, I want to say something really quickly. There's a book written by a mentor of mine about 35 years ago, called The European Tribe. It's by an author called Carol Phillips. And when I tried to get my book published initially, I was telling people about the idea. Somebody said, "Oh, it's already been done. It's already been done. There's already been a black person who travels through Europe." All right, and so of course you have, he went to Yugoslavia, so you have all these geopolitical changes, but also you have we can't even, and it was around the time I was born he wrote that book, but you can't have 2 black people traveling around Europe, writing about Europe, and I think Lisette's experience really shows that as well, is that we could have written this book at the exact same time. We could have set off together,
totally different,
and it would have been a totally different book, So you're trying to tell the history history of the black community. I was trying to tell these stories that everyone could anchor themselves to. But it was also a very subjective journey through Europe. And that's why it's so powerful when I hear other people are doing this kind of journey, because there is always new things to learn.
You were going to Barcelona and not to Madrid?
True. And it was very hard. I was more interested in Barcelona than Madrid, because I went to both cities before, but not seeking for the African diaspora at all. And it was very hard in Barcelona, because in the book there was a lot written, a lot of research on the other cities and countries. But in Spain, I felt like, will I find something? For I feel like you found some things, but there was a gap comparing to Paris, for example, and I just came from France.
Do you agree? Was it harder for you to find something in Madrid?
In Spain. I mean, I wouldn't even say that I went to Spain in the book. It's not a big part of the book. There's a very small element where I passed through Madrid. But I mean, it's interesting because there are gaps in this book that are there because the book has a certain size, I couldn't fit everything. But B, I was running out of money, so I had to try and quickly go. Especially that was towards the end of my journey, and I knew I had to get to Lisbon. And my Interrail pass was running out, and I was running out of money, so I had to fly through Spain, get to Lisbon, and then I'm going to read a passage at the end that will let you know how sort of tight it was. And then I had 2 weeks, I think, in Lisbon, and then which is the minimum amount of time I needed in each space. I mean, there were subsequent trips, research trips after the main journey. But yeah, no, Rome, I passed through Rome very briefly. It's not a part of the book, really.
But I found something special in Barcelona, because I was so inspired by France. That's where I just came from, and I was like, I will not find anything. But then in Barcelona, I was walking through this small street, and then we were seeking for a library we had found on the internet. And then we enter, we meet a poetess, and we enter the bookstore, and I see all the books that I love, but then in Spanish.
What kind of books?
A lot of poetry books, but also Maya Angelou. Yeah, so I walk in, and I'm like, what is this store? Or where did I... where am I? Where are we? And then she started explaining, how the bookstore was founded, how it's the first place for people of color to actually come in and perform. And she was talking about activities all the time. And it was very special to meet her there and to know that there is a spark of. Mm-hmm.
How did you I had a certain way of finding these spaces. How did you go about when did you know that you were in a space that felt like it had a story to tell related to blackness? Did you have a feeling, or how did you go about finding these spaces?
For sure, I would always go to African restaurants or African places that you could just find easily. But next to it, because I know a lot of poets, I would actually ask a poet of that country if I knew one. Where can I go? Where can I find the stories? Where can I find people? And then also being guided by the research in your book, and sometimes seeking for literally the same place, seeing if it's still there, seeing if it's not there. That was my approach.
Well, we're going to listen to you.
Oh, yeah.
But before we do, I want to, because you brought also people along on your journey, not only today, but also on your journey through Europe. Absa Sisokko. She made this beautiful piece of art, and she's over there. So maybe we can ask you something about it and what inspired you on this journey through Europe.
So basically, going with Lisette on the trip, as she said before, we were listening to Johny Pitts' book. And while listening to the book, we would have experiences where, that would tell us that we're women, obviously, because like, it's kind of ironic. While listening to a book about like the African diaspora, that people would come up to us and just start touching us or something because they feel entitled or in a certain way. And so at some point I started thinking about like how, because we all have like different disciplines, or like from the same emotion, we have a different way of translating it to the world. So that's where like the whole transmission also comes in. And so I started to think about like, how can I approach this more from a metaphorical point of view in my art, so in my installation. And at some point we were in the car, Lisette and I.
Going to Toulon, yeah.
Yeah, we went to Toulon, which is also a stop Johny Pitts has in their book. And while listening, we were listening to a part that talks about blanchissement. That's how Johny said it. Like blanchissement means, I guess, it touches the topic, which is whitewashing in a sense. So then I was like, okay, how can I paint a portrait that kind of transcends in a way that topic? So I decided to paint portraits in bleach, just to make the metaphor.
Because blanchissement is bleachment and it means erasement.
Yeah. And so obviously we were not only thinking about the trauma we've been through, but like kind of the beauty, ironically, the beauty that comes afterwards. So I wanted to make something pretty, right? And then the copper tubes for me were a metaphor for our history because, I did some research on the medium copper. And the metaphor for me was that copper tubes are used for gas and liquid comes out. So it was a metaphor for how we kind of experience trauma in a sense, or euphoria, or whatever extreme sentiments, and how we have like a process of working it through and then making something else out of it, I guess, something productive or whatever. And then, the copper tubes for me is also a reference to history, because we used to, like, if you think about back in the day, buildings were often using like metal tubes or like copper tubes. So that's a metaphor for that. And then I also made teddy bears, I guess. I call them teddy bears, but they don't really look like them. But like the softness, or like the naivety of the teddy bear is like a metaphor for my naivety towards my identity. Like Johny Pitts or Lisette said at some point that you don't really feel African or you don't really feel European. But I personally always thought of myself what people teach me. So obviously in Belgium, I'm simply an African, but I have a disassociation at the same time with my African roots, because my father immigrated and he was taught to kind of like not really forget where he comes from, but he never transcended everything to me, which led me to want to research more about my identity, obviously. And so, I'm very grateful that Lisette invited me on this journey for this,
Thank you so much. There's so much in it and it's so beautiful, so thank you. Absa Sisokko. And Lisette, I want to ask you to move towards the mic, the other mic, and also to introduce the people maybe first I have to ask you, who did you brought today?
Oh, okay. So I brought some amazing people. You brought one of them. Maybe explain.
I brought my father.
He's right here, and we met today, and I already love his playing, and I'm excited to bringing two more performances, perhaps. I brought Giovanni, a dancer. I brought Neil. Yeah, it already shows what he does. Yeah, and after the research, well, during the research, there was a lot of poetry writing, and there where I felt like Johny focused on a lot of research, a lot of history, a lot of like. I was reading your book, and it felt like this is like history classes. Like I'm having the history class that I missed while traveling, and you focused on photographing and analyzing. There, I felt more like I was focusing on the emotional side of it and the poetic side of it. And I was just writing poems, and then we made music and dance and art from it. And I want to show you a piece of what we did. Yeah. Memories of my brother. Every day he walked to school with the weight of dead neighbors in his backpack. On his right hand, my sister, who with each birthday becomes as old as the Rwandan genocide. On his left hand, a little girl who wanted to comfort her mother, but did not know she could not comfort Rwandan mothers. They already understood what the motherland had become, and also what it had been, a paradise, and then a river of blood flowing from corpses, friends, family members, and via as I only understood this landscape, dit huisje, boompje, beestje leven, even dit huisje, boompje, beestje leven zelfs, al waren we toen al de vreemde vruchten in de fruitmand. We learned the national anthem together. Wilhelmus. We leerden het hebben over koetjes en kalfjes. En dat de appel niet ver van de boom valt. We verfden rood, wit, blauw op onze wangetjes. En als Nederland de voorselecties van het WK niet haalde, dan deden we net alsof we Vlamingen waren. Wij, we became Afropeans. For home, sometimes home is not a place, sometimes home is a person. And sometimes a home is a taste, and sometimes home is a lover, and sometimes home is a mother. This is what we do. Singing this is the way we do. Singing this is the way we move. And this is the way we move. is the Matonge Blues, and this is Chateau Rouge, and this is Belmer Park Theater, this is Gare du Nord, and this is the way we give, the way we take, the way we bring, the way we break, the way we hold, the way we heal, the way we grieve, the way we are, the way we live, the life we live, the life we live, the life we live. Singing this is Little Africa, and this is the Benelux, and dit is de Benelux, dit is Belmer, dit is Black Archives, dit is wie we zijn, en dit is wat we doen, dit is hoe we doen, en dit is hoe we doen, dit is hoe we doen, dit is hoe we doen.
Because again, words have power, words have meaning. Okay, and I always say, like, if you tell a small child that he's not.
What we always do when we play and when we bring, actually in the show, this is the moment where I'm like, so hey, I'm Lisette, this is na. But what we always do during our shows is we tell the stories that we feel in the moment. So for example, I go to Neil and I'm like, Neil, play tonight. Yeah. The conversations that you've heard, the people that are here. Play the seeking, het zoeken en zoeken en zoeken. The years of researching. And I want you to dance because I feel like storytellers, for example what Johny does, but also what Absa does, I feel like sometimes as a storyteller, when that is your purpose, you also tell the stories that are not yours, but that have impacted you. So I want you to dance, not a storyteller, but the person that has told their story. So you have told your story to one of them, for example, and they are telling it to others, but you are left there. And your story has been told. A story to tell, a room of one's own. I look these youngsters in the eye, telling them to tell their own stories before they tell them for us. Tonight it is for us, by us. Young girl has seen nothing, but I felt it all. I felt it all. I was born with a story to tell, a story. I was born with a story to tell, a story. I was born with a story to tell, a story to tell, a mission to heal, permission to break. I was born with a story to tell. I was born with a story to tell. I was born with a story to tell, permission to break, a mission to heal. The untold, the silent, turning into the sincere. Looking at my family members, my community, my country, seeking synonyms for unity, singing, we need healing, oh, we need healing from this hurting. Oh, we need healing from this hurting. I cannot breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. We need a dialogue on breathing again. We need a dialogue on breathing again. A story to tell, story to tell. A story to tell, story to tell. We need grieving from these losses. We need distance from this violence. I have witnessed nothing but intergenerational joy turning into intergenerational trauma. They gave me their stories and called them history. I tell them my story and call it her story. I told them their stories like it was my story. I told them I story. I tell them our stories. I tell us our stories. Story to tell, 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 story to tell. Story to tell, story to tell, a story to tell, story to, a story to, a story to tell. Now, I've been away for a while, seeing, seeking, the opposite of soaring, soul searching, meeting, researching. I've been seated on tables where there was no seat for me. I've been praying, craving, withholding, abstaining, for there's dust in it. From continent to continent, there's dust in it. I swallowed what they've said about my country, about my continent, about my context, about my tongue, about my language. I've swallowed what they said about my mother. I swallowed what they taught me on my grandmothers. I swallowed what they said about my skin color. I swallowed. Some days I was one of them. Story to tell, 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 story to tell. Some days I was one of them. You wonder who they are while your fingers linger in my hair. Some days I was one of them, one of they. Some days you were one of them, one of they. Letting what goes into me, the file, go into my heart. I spit it out now. I spit it out now. What I run away from, what I hid. And still, even when we do not rise, even when we do not speak, in silence we seek, and we seek. I will not remain in the danger of a single story. I look my cousins in the eye, my brothers, my offsprings, my children. You are entitled to a life. You are entitled to a life. You are entitled to a life. You have the right. The right. They gave me their stories, and I called them history. They gave me their stories, and they called them history. I call them history, we call them history. I tell them my story. I tell them my story and call it her story. I tell them their stories. I tell them their stories like it was my story. I tell them I story. I tell them our stories. 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 A story to tell, a story to tell, a story to tell. Permission to break, a mission to heal, a mission to heal, a mission to heal. A mission to heal, a mission to heal, permission to break, 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 a mission to heal, a mission to heal, a mission to heal.
Lisette Ma Neza.
Recently voted Europe's most boring capital instead of Brussels in my Brussels.
Neil Akenzua, Giovanni Pisas, Pape Seck, Lisette Ma Neza. And you will come back at the end of the this evening, so there will be more of this beautiful music. And the next guest is Vamba Sherif, a writer. He wrote 7 books and the autobiographical book Ongekende Liefde. He was a co-composer of the collection of stories Zwart Afro-Europese literatuur van de lage landen, so from Belgium and the Netherlands. And he will be here on behalf of visual artist and photographer Judith Quax, who can't be here because she's at the Biennale of Dakar right now. And we are going to show some visual work from her, from the project Tuki, Voyage à Dakar. And that's also a travelogue for which you made an essay. So please give a warm welcome to Vamba Sherif. So before we get into the project of Judith, we were saying that it was kind of ironic or funny that she has someone from the Netherlands, like the only indigenous European in this program. Judith is now in Africa, and we are here. But before we go into her project, first Vamba, because you also were the initiator of this book, Zwart.
Yes.
And there's also the title Afro-Europe, so Afro, but then with a stripe.
Yes.
European literature. How come that you? Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Ruka. Actually, when the book was published and it received a lot of attention in the Dutch media and in Belgium, and for the first time we were talking about Afropeans, Afro-Europeans, and we felt what initiated the anthology was the absence of our voices in the Netherlands and in Belgium. There are black writers, but we are so very few. So we decided, all right, we are going to come together and to showcase the talents that we have among us, the Africans. And so for the first time when we were going about researching the anthology, we're surprised by the amount of talents that were there here in the Netherlands and in Belgium.
Writers.
So much more than we could, select for the anthology. And the idea was to try to write about the European experience as a black person, And so it came as a surprise to many people in the Netherlands. So this is how Africans or black people are living in this country. And the book became very successful, and it led to a lot of, discussions and interviews, and we felt we've achieved something. We've drawn attention to our existence here, and because, what triggered your journey through Europe is the idea that black people have always been part of European history. I was surprised as a child when I was reading Russian literature to try to realize that, the father of the Russian literature is actually a black man, Pushkin. And I would say, oh my God. So our presence, even in Russia, we've been in Russia before. And, and reading history, I discovered that an Egyptian pharaoh, Sisokko, actually conquered part of Europe, and had black settlements in Europe, in the heart of Europe. So black people have always been part of this European reality. So it's not something new. And what Johnny, you are doing, and other people, and we are also doing, is to try to chart and to try to, to say, all right, we are part of this world. We are here to stay. We're not going anywhere. This is our reality. Europe is part of us.
Did you already read the book Afropean before you came up with an Afro-European?
No. We've heard of it, but it's a terminology that existed before the book. People have been talking about it. There's someone, was it an English Ethiopian or something, who coined something, what was her name, Afro-Hershi or something? I don't know. So the term Afro-European is an old thing, so we were just responding to that reality, so it's not that that we read the book first, but we heard about it. And there are other, for example, the mentor, Cara Phillips, the European tribe, which is actually just a selection of stories of African princes in Europe, just a few of them, you know. But our stories are so huge. Our world is so huge.
Yeah.
And so I'm very, very grateful that finally, people are, daring to tell our story, you know, thanks partly to Johny and to our efforts too. You know, so I hope many people will take such journeys, many people will go through, because there are aspects of Europe, Afro-European reality that Johny and I don't know about, you know. So if someone is here, read a book, it's inspired, you know, they are welcome to go and to go to Moscow, for example, or Petersburg, to see the descendants of Pushkin, for example.
Now is not a good time to go to Moscow, but...
that would be, no, not to go to Moscow, but maybe after 10 years. So, you know.
So now about the project from Judith, who couldn't be here.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about it? Tuki, the project called Tuki.
Yes, Voyage à Dakar. I came across Judith's work years ago. What she is doing is to try to document the life story of Africans who are in Europe, but whose life is going on in Africa. There are people with partners in Africa. So what he does is go to these people and talk to them and really photograph items that remind them of home. You know, it's like a presence in absence, you know, so which is very unique. You know, there are some people who, because they are illegal in Europe, Africans are illegal, so they cannot bring their wives, their family here. So those families are present in absence. You know, so that's what she started to do. And that really attracted me. And I said, all right, one day if you have an idea or project, I would like to work with you. And so she had this idea because she has a child born here of Senegalese father. And the father is not present in her life. So she decided, all right, I'm going to take a journey by car from the Netherlands, going through France, Spain, you know, crossing the Mediterranean to North Africa, and ending in Senegal. And I thought it was a brilliant idea, but very dangerous, you know, because we are talking about a boy who was 6 or 7 years old, 4. All right, so very young, you know. So, but there was also something about it that attracted me, because the courage that you know it takes to do that, the love for Africa, because you're saying, all right, she could have chosen to fly, you know, but she wants her child born and bred here to see the majesty of Africa, you know, to really, really smell Africa. So I felt, you know, I said, why not? If we do that, I might write my own contribution in the form of an essay about an African child. Yeah. And that's what I did. Yeah.
So Johny, what do you think it is about, like, traveling slower that makes it like a real different experience?
Well, I suppose like the term Afropean, because I removed the hyphen in order to suggest a blurring of identity a little bit. You know, I'm interested in blur. I'm interested in where one thing becomes another, the space in between, liminal terrain. So for me, just the physical act of traveling by train, for instance, traveling slowly, crossing borders, seeing how one country blends into the next, is very important for me. You get a better sense of where you are and how a continent is put together. You know, even if it's just an idea, the geography that is part of that idea, you get a better sense of it when you take things slowly, you know, I really tried to avoid taking any planes on my journey. There was one that I had to take because my ferry was cancelled. I was supposed to get a ferry from Stockholm to Moscow, but it was cancelled, and so I had to get a plane. There was the scariest plane journey I've ever been on Russia airplanes. They still had like a VHS player in the but yeah. So for that reason, I wanted to avoid planes as well, just because it feels safer on a train. And then you can get into conversations on a train. It's an interesting place. I love that in between space. That's a metaphor for me as I travel. I think you learn more about a place taking it slowly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we're going to listen to your essay that you wrote for this project. Wow, it's a it's a good one. It's a good sound.
And before we do that, I wanted to just this is my latest. It's my memoir. It's actually a long letter to my daughter. Unprecedented Love is the title, Ongekende Liefde. So I'm going to read this essay, and the title is The African Child.
Yeah, before you do so,
yes,
maybe we can already say something about the beginning of this, because we're going to look at the visual piece of art from Judith. Oké, sorry. Nog even terug, alsjeblieft. Yeah. Okay. Well, this is maybe a good starting point because we're seeing her son here, and Noah Saliu. So they are traveling from Amsterdam to Dakar in a Mercedes. Mm-hmm. And here we're going to start this video, this visual piece of art that Judith made, with a moment that she's in Morocco. Yes. And they're writing a letter to his father, and his father is in New York. Mm-hmm. And there's also something about, like in the project about, that we can travel from another place to another place, but not everybody is so flexible. It's not about the flexibility of the people. It's about the flexibility of the this world and the passport where you can travel. With some passport, you can travel through the whole world, and others you can't. Maybe that's already something to say about the video.
Yes, actually what she did was she had a telephone with her, and she was shooting for hours, and beautiful and captivating images, and what I find interesting about and fascinating about this project is the fact that we are concentrating tonight on being blacks and European, but what Judith is trying to do is to really unite her child and confront us with that heritage, that African aspect of our child. And I find that very captivating, because sometimes we get lost. We tend to forget, where that particular aspect of our heritage.
Yeah. Sorry, but one more question before you go. I know I already said you're going to start, but I want to ask one more question about, because it's also the theme of your book.
Yes.
Like the generations.
Indeed.
Yeah. So what do you find as a father of we can say Afropean child?
Yes.
What are your hopes for the future?
Yes, it's very challenging, because I came from a collective society. I was loved. I did not have the challenges that a black European child like you, like Johny, have. So I feel I'm very hopeful, but the challenges are very enormous, because if you walk out, people look at you and they see that color. They're not looking at you as this Afro-European, Afropean. No, they are perhaps looking at you as this Jamaican or African, So what do you as a child do with that? And this is where our stories where we came from is very, very important. You know, like you having a father here, sharing with us his talents is something unique to be proud of. And this is what I try to tell my daughter, this what in this letter form, that I come from a very long tradition of scholars in Africa, and you should be very proud of them. So if you walk out, whatever people say about you, you should be very proud of yourself. This is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. And we're going to listen to you. And this is the moment to start the video.
Adama. Adama. Koulibaly. Nou, de elfen in de lucht. En wat nog meer?
Dan schieten ze met pijlen en bogen in de lucht.
Aha.
Nee, ik wil gewoon alleen maar dag.
Oké, ja, dat is dat. Zeg maar merci.
Merci.
The African child. There is an African version of creation in which woman, the mother, is represented as a cooking pot, as open arms, ready to receive and protect her child. In this version, which slightly varies from one place to another, a mother's love for her child stands central. It is a love grounded in the fact that she was the first human being to roam the earth, the first to feel the pain and joy of birth and life. The role of the mother in many countries in Africa transcends the restrictions society imposes on women, even in those societies where her rights are limited. Long before the advent of Islam and Christianity, the mother was worshipped as a goddess. To an African child, the mother is much more than the sum of her role as a parent. The child regards her as the anchor point from where he or she undertakes life's challenges. There are countless stories of how children separated from their mothers remain bound to them by a connection deeper than any physical bond, which leads the children in the end to return to the mother, to the cradle of their existence. The journey of child and mother begins with birth, but in essence, the journey has no ending. The journey takes on many forms as the child grows, manifesting itself in the experiences the two share, either alone or together. The stories they tell each other, the pain of separation and the joy of reunion, the physical journey both undertake, the spiritual journey in the form of the love that binds them. These are all variations of the same journey. The two complement one another in ways that are indescribable. The bond between mother and child takes on a special significance when that child happens to be of two worlds, the African and the European. A child who inherits these two worlds must, for his or her survivor, be prepared to carry the baggage of these two different and sometimes opposing worlds. His or her very well-being depends on this. This is where the role of parenting comes in. The child needs to learn to accept these two worlds with all their histories and imperfections. The bond between Noah and his mother, Judith Quax, is a union of these two worlds. It is a journey between these spheres of influence. Mother and child are like a pendulum moving between one word and the other, each of the two words pulling at them, one as appealing as the other. Sometimes one of the two gains the upper hand, and the child experiences a great loss. Judith must have been aware of this while pregnant with Noah. The child's father lived elsewhere, and she must have realized that the burden of raising him was hers, shared with the father on an occasional basis, but as often as possible. How to prepare the child for a life in which one aspect of his heritage was absent. How to bring him up in the Netherlands in such a way that he would be and stay proud of a heritage mostly absent from his life. These questions must have necessitated the steps Judith would later take to prepare her son for the challenges these two words will pose. The challenge was not whether Noah should choose his European heritage above the African, but rather how to unite both of these words within him. Not looking down at one for reasons of history, but rather being one with both. The child could be better informed and his views better shaped if he were to see the continent of his father up close and personal from a unique perspective. He needed to travel through it, not fly over it from one port of entry to another, but proceed in a slower, more gradual way. This was by car. This allowed Noah to see and smell Africa in ways that would permanently shape his views of the world. It let him see that the Africa he had heard about and which was portrayed so negatively in the media is in fact a huge continent that contains within its borders cultures as various as the colors of the world. Voyage à Dakar was born. The journey begins in the Netherlands, through France and then Spain. In Morocco, Noah dictates a letter to his absent father in a language that links him to his past, to his heritage. The letter is written in Arabic, a language that connects Noah to his namesake, the great caliph and scholar of the Murid Sufi Brotherhood in Senegal, Serigne Saliou Mbacké, a descendant of the great Ahmadou Bamba, founder of the Mouridiyya. To this word, ensconced in history, in mysticism, in knowledge, the child and his mother are headed to a place with a way of life that preaches love and that embraces all despite race, color, and creed. The letter reads, "To my beloved father, Adama Coulibaly, I'm writing to tell you that I am in a good health and that we requested and were granted visa and are on our way." Then Noah, perhaps aware of the stories his mother had told him of his heritage, attempts to make connection by dictating that he sees birds, fairies, and spirits in the air. The child expresses those mystical aspects of his heritage, not aware at that moment that one day in the distant future, Noah the adult will go in search of Noah the child, and he will find him seated in a chair dictating the letter, and he will be proud of that version of himself, and he might even gain a deeper understanding of a heritage that has at its core a profound love for humanity. It takes a village to raise a child, the African proverb goes. In bringing Noah Saliou to Africa, to Senegal, mother and child are not alone. People help them along the way. A child is a product of parents who belong to a group of people, to a community, to a collective that ensures that the child's upbringing and future are mapped out according to specific rules that result in the child becoming the pride of the group. Later, as an adult, the child is expected to take over responsibility from those who taught him. The child, in turn, teaches his own offspring, ensuring continuity and the cohesiveness of the community. A child born into such societies is the responsibility of not only the parents, the immediate family, but of a vast chain of relatives who are all bound by kinship that transcends the borders recently drawn up by colonial powers. Therefore, a child who was born a Coulibaly or a Sharif or a Seck, like Judith Noah Salio, would easily have families stretching across borders of modern-day Senegal, Mali, Guinea, Ivory Coast, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Burkina Faso, and other countries. This sense of community ensures that the child is welcome in all these countries. This is what Judith and Noah experienced during the journey. They are not alone. A whole community is present along the way to help them reach Senegal. Journeys are means of self-discovery. They are ways of realizing that the world is full of riches so diverse, this dilutes all efforts by any one group to feel superior to another. And when such a journey is intended to initiate a child into the world of his father, it becomes necessary. In the other world, his father's world, the child will learn what it means to share, to be part of a whole community, and therefore of the world. Thank you well. Thank you.
And now we're getting into the intergenerational part of this evening. I think, and we're also our journey brought us to Senegal, the home country of my father. So I thought it would be really nice for this event to invite my father, a percussionist, to make this a real Afropean experience. So I want to invite him back to the second performance of, or actually all performances, but the second musical performances of this evening, Pape Seck. Dankjewel. Jurjev, zou ik zeggen. So now we're moving into we have the sounds. We already got the Afropean sounds, and now we're moving into the visual part with Tarona, photographer, artist, and director based in Rotterdam. Her work is a continuous exploration and examination of both the visual representation and misrepresentation of Black and Afro-diasporic people. It is also an exploration of the self, what it means to be of mixed racial descent, spanning continents, and the implications for current and future generations' collective identity. Welcome, Tarona.
Your essay almost made me cry. No, I'm not gonna lie, I actually cried. Thank you.
I'm happy you're here. And when I asked you if you want to join this conversation, you said that it would be a full circle for you. Why?
Okay, so there are actually two moments that are very specific before I found your book, and they both happened in 2019. The first one was when I was asked by a museum to build work where they asked me, what does it mean to you to be of Caribbean descent? I literally told them, I don't know. I don't know what it means. I think for me it means to be in between worlds, because either I'm Caribbean or, you know, when I go back to Caribbean, I'm too Dutch. When I'm in the Netherlands, I'm too Caribbean. So I don't know what it means. The second instance, and I remember this specifically because it made such a big impact on me, was on November 4th, 2019, when I first saw Jenny Kiru's Rebirth is Necessary. She's a British-Nigerian director, and she made a brilliant film. And that film made such an impact on me because I saw myself the way I wanted to be represented, and the way I wanted my family to be represented, and all my friends and all my ancestors.
What did you see? What was it about the film that you saw yourself?
It was dignified. That is the most powerful word I can think of it for it. It was dignified, and it was joyful. These two events led me to my artistry, which I officially started in 2020 when I was writing an application for funding. And I was doing research, and I wrote, I Googled at some point, and I was, you know how you Google things, and I literally said, who am I supposed to be as a Black person in Europe? And somehow, your book came up. So that is how Afropean entered my consciousness, when I was literally seeking, how am I supposed to be a Black person in Europe? When I got the funding, it was the first book I bought, because I was like, okay, if this is the book that comes up, then this is the book I need to buy, because I was very broke at the time. And then when I got the funding, I bought the book. And it's a full circle moment for me, because it was a journey in which I literally started to find out who I was. Essentially, after years and years of being asked, where do you come from? Where do you really come from? You know, are you this? Are you that? Where do you belong? Etc. And I was like, okay, I just want to put a stop to all of this, because I want to know where I come from for me, not for other people. So I also did a DNA test, and it actually came out that I'm 38.5% Scandinavian, for example, which was really funny to my friends. And the fact that I'm also Greek and Italian, which is really funny to my partner for some reason. I don't know why. He's like, you always want to go to Greece because you're Greek, right? So I was finding out actually that my DNA was telling me that I was based between Europe, Africa, and South America. So I was part of the transatlantic triangle. And I remember reading the book, especially the Amsterdam chapter, and there was a moment where you were speaking where you were asked a question, and you write that from your ego you wanted to respond and be like, yes, of course, like I know all of this. And then you write something, I don't know exactly what it was, but I remember it very well. You wrote something about where someone simply said, I don't know, and how much of an impact that had on you. And I remember reading that in the book and thinking, it's okay to not know. Like, it's okay that I don't know. And the fact that I didn't know leads me where I am today as an artist, as a director, as a filmmaker. It was the beginning of the whole journey. So the fact that I read that in your book, like, also, that's why it's full circle. Like, speaking to you today, thank you. Thank you for being honest about it. So yeah, I'm very happy today.
That's really powerful. It makes me think of, I remember hearing this quote. I wish I could tell you who said it, but it's, you know, maybe when we get to a point in our lives where we don't know where we're going, maybe our real journey has begun, you know, and that's really powerful to me. And I think certainly creatively, I think that's where creativity emerges, where you get to a point where everything feels amorphous, and you kind of, and that's where the work begins, you know. And I think that's what happened with me. I think I had an idea of what Black Europe was, and then in the journey, I got lost. And then it was at that point where I started to understand really what Afropean might mean. But it means a lot. I think it just goes to prove that, you know, when you write about something that's personal and you're honest, then that has a way of becoming universal, because that's all I was trying to do, is be honest about my situation. And I think that's the way to human connection, I've learned. So it's amazing that resonated with you. Yeah. Thank you.
Maybe we should look at some photographs you took. So maybe you can just go to the next slide. Okay. So this one, this was the. Where did you took this picture?
This was in Chateau Rouge in Paris, and almost every picture, the 10,000 pictures from this archive of images taken over a period of 10 years. Not just while I was on this particular journey. This was taken on this particular journey. This image, and do you know what it's inspired by? Actually, is the music video for Nena Cherry and Youssou N'Dour, 7 Seconds, is a beautiful image, and it's people crisscrossing and passing, and this notion of blur. And I'm really interested in blurriness in images, so that's what I was constantly looking for at the beginning of my journey.
Yeah, because I put this picture in the slide because you said, why isn't this one the book cover?
I did in the no disrespect. But it was an honest question where I was like, okay, why? Thinking about it more, I understand why the cover is the cover of the book, but I was also wondering why you didn't choose this one, and I will explain to you why. I thought it was so telling of the story that you were telling, in the sense that you find yourself traveling through Europe, and there's all these white bodies moving around, and then you have a black man and a young child moving together in their center stage. And I thought it was very interesting because it's also telling of what happens to generations to come, right? And how much we often need our mentors and how much we need our elders also to guide us. And like you said, it takes a village to raise a child. We need that guidance. And from that perspective, by reading your book, I thought actually this was the perfect image. So if you ever do a repressing,
just did.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point because, young writer, never been published before, got the deal after I did the traveling, and you don't have much say. I mean, I had to really fight just to get an image on the cover, I had to really fight for that.
Maybe we can go to the cover?
Yeah, but yeah, maybe next time. I never thought of that image. It's a cover. Yeah, this is the cover.
Does this picture, why does it symbolize as Afropean for you?
Well, first I should say that I was desperate to get a colour photograph on the cover, but they wouldn't let me. This was a kind of a compromise that I'm happy with. I'm not talking about the host, by the way. I'm talking about my UK publisher, but these are who I had the arguments with, and then everyone just publishes the same cover, and I'm happy with it. I can live with it anyway. Put it that way. And I think that one of the reasons I don't mind it as a cover is it symbolizes. I took a lot of photographs on the metro systems around Europe, and part of that is because I'm a nerd for metro systems.
We can also look at the other one.
Yeah, like the aesthetics, the man-made lighting. But really, the deeper reason is because I was traveling during the winter. I wasn't looking for carnivals or protests or the images that are very often associated with a kind of performative blackness. What I was looking for were moments of everyday humanity within the black community that I don't see often enough. And I found that on the metro, to me, it's symbolic of a few reasons. One is most of the time, like on the cover or here, you would imagine that these people are commuting to work, or they're taking their kids to school, or there's nothing superlative.
Something everydayness.
It's a banality, which there's a real photographic tradition attached to banality that white photographers often look at. But I don't think it appears often enough when we see images of black people, the banality every day, and a real normality. I wanted to normalize the black image in Europe. Another reason is because I think I mentioned this before, is I'm interested in liminality, the space between A and B, and that's sort of what a train represents to me. Is it's a space where you're in between spaces, and so there are a lot of images on the metro. It's a bit of a kind of motif in my work for this body of work.
Maybe this is a nice moment to, because you talked about the in-betweenness, to look at a photograph of you, Tarona, the one with the sea. Yes.
I've never seen it this big.
And this also symbolizes in-betweenness. Can you tell us something about this one?
Yes, I can. It also reminds, it's you spoke about, you know, when you were talking about copper and how we basically alchemize one thing into another. This is representative of that as well. So this image is called Transatlantic, and it's an image that I made for an ongoing visual research that I'm doing called Reflective Material, which is about being in between worlds, essentially, and working on the notion of a lingua franca, which means a bridge language, and that means that it's a language that you can use when you don't natively both speak the same language. So English, for example, is a lingua franca. Papiamento is also a lingua franca, the language that we speak on Curaçao. I made this image because I was like, okay, I'm here in Europe. My father is from Curaçao. My mother has roots in Venezuela. Like, how did we get here? That question came to my mind. How did we get here? And I thought of like, it's so amazing that I get to be here and be an artist and do all of these things and, you know, but I also then thought of my ancestors who were shipped. And it felt very bittersweet because I was like, without that tragedy, I could not have been here. And it also reminds me of Arthur Jaffa saying, can we think about jazz and hip hop and all the beautiful things that come from African-American works without linking slavery to it? Can we do that? Can we separate these two things? And I was like, no, you cannot, absolutely not. So this image represents that. So it represents the voyage that we took, which is bound by water. Also, the transatlantic triangle is bound by water. And it also represents the horrors and the bloodshed. And that's why the red dot in the middle is so prominent. So I worked with symbolism in this image.
It's really beautiful and impressive.
Thank you.
And maybe because you were talking about the performativity before, and I think because when you're trying to have this like everyday, the going to work, the vibe, on display, maybe it also means that you as a photographer has to be more far away of the topic that you're making a picture of. So how are you looking about the? You can have like a picture that is performative, and then you can go like close. You're close to the person you're making a picture of, but to have that everydayness, you also have to be more of a voyeur. So how do you
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting when Lisette was saying that my book is analytical, and there's a truth to that. But really, I see it as I attacked it initially as a poet. And I mentioned this yesterday at the Black Archives. When you look at the history, I mean the etymology of the word photograph, from the ancient Greek, is photos and graphos. It's photos, light, graphos, to write. Photograph then means to write with light, and there's a photojournalism, a type of writing, and then there is a kind of poetry. And so what I'm looking for is a tenderness, is moments of people lost in thought. I'm looking for visual poetry. That's kind of what I'm really interested in. And I think that there is a long tradition of this performance in black photography. Whether you look at people like James Barner or Malik Sidibe, or but you know, there exists a photograph of my great uncle Johny Pitts, who I'm named after, and he is in. He was part of the Harlem Hellfighters, actually, who fought in World War I. But there's an image of him in Brooklyn, dressed up in his Sunday best. And this image is beautiful, no doubt about it. It also tells me nothing about my great uncle. It's performative, it's him in his Sunday best. And I understand why we want to see, why it's important sometimes to see black people, our community dressed up, you know. But also, you know, I would have loved, done nothing more than to see him walking along the street, dressed as he usually dresses, you know, without a curtain behind him that was palatial. And it brings me to this Mos Def quote, where he says, "We're either niggas or kings, we're either bitches or queens, there's never no in-betweens." And so for me, it's important to look at the in-betweenness, you know, to look at, you know, why do I have to be a king to be black? Why can't I just be human?
I really would like to look at the photos of the carnival research, because you get really close. Yeah, can you tell us something about that research that you did?
Yes. So these photos were shot in 2019 during the carnival in Rotterdam, the summer carnival, where basically mainly Caribbean communities walk and display. And it's really funny, actually, because I went to Carnival that day to actually just go to Carnival, but I had my camera with me. And I thought to myself, I really don't feel like photographing the standardized image of, you know, the women doing all the floral things. And also what I noticed was that, no, all the photographers were white men. And I was literally outside the crowd. I was the only professional photographer, woman, who was Caribbean. And this allowed me to get up close. They were like, of course, come, and etc. And I photographed these, and the way I photographed them was, I want to look at the craft. I want to look at the craft that goes into this work, because what a lot of people don't know is that Carnival is worked on for a whole year. So they create the costumes, they do the ideas, they make the themes, etc., who's going to walk, who's going to do the band. And I wanted to bring back the idea of craft and honor that craft. So some images were taken full, but then cropped later to actually cut out the faces, to make it coherent and to honor that craft, because there's such a big history in terms of Carnival. And it was my feeling also, partly out of annoyance, but also partly out of wanting to inject something new into the archive in terms of Carnival, is that there are so many hidden messages actually in all of these costumes and things. All of it symbolizes something, even though it just looks powerful and colorful and joyful. You know, they all
Can we see something
refer to something. Sorry?
Can we see something in the picture that symbolizes something else?
Well, for example, the way...
Go back to the first...
No, I think they all apply. So, for example, the beading that's done here, like the colors that were used, you know, they think a lot about the colors. So it's not just a theme like, oh, we're doing this or that. The gold represents, obviously, regalness, royalty, all those ideas that go into it. But also the fact that everything is made by hand, which is wild to me, because they make like 50 costumes for one group, and there are like 100 groups that day.
I think this is a really interesting one, because it's a, you can say sexual part of the body, but you this is not a sexualized photograph.
No. No. I have like 50 things I want to say all at once.
Go ahead.
No, it's not sexualized. And I think it's also not sexualized because I'm a woman. And I wanted to move away from that whole idea of like, oh, look, you know, of course they're there to be looked at, you know, when they're walking, and they're all beautiful, obviously. I can see that. But I was like, I don't want to focus on that. I want to, you know, show parts that maybe a lot of people might miss in the moment because it's also fast and it's, you know, there's a lot going on. And I also, when I edit the images, I also think about, okay, what looks not only pleasing to the eye, but what also gives an overload of information, because this is how Carnival feels. So the feeling of Carnival also moves into the image, for me at least. So that's also what I'm constantly concerned with when I'm editing these images. That's how I crop them and choose my cuts. Yeah.
What do you think, Johnny?
And I was just thinking, it's so interesting of my sort of critique earlier, you know, of trying to avoid carnivals and trying to, but actually it just goes to show, like when it's done with nuance, you know, when I've never seen photographs of a carnival like this before. This is not reductive. This is interesting, and it gets to the crux of why carnivals are important for the black community, you know? And that's why I think like black practitioners are so important, too rare, you know? And it also makes me think of the work of, I don't know if you're familiar with Liz Johnson Arthur.
Absolutely.
Right, yeah.
Such a fan. Liz, if you're watching this, I'm such a fan.
Yeah, me too. Who's a master, you know? And also her photographs in lots of ways are very performative, but they're rendered surreal and fresh because she knows what she's doing. There are layers. It's nuanced. It's not just people laughing, or, you know, she's not looking for type, you know. The black culture is in safe hands with her as a photographer, and I see the same in Tarona's work.
Yeah, that is a compliment. Thank you.
Because Liz was in the book you were when I showed you these pictures earlier, these pictures, photographs. You talked about the book B-side. Yeah, can you? Why did the pictures of Tarona make you think about this book?
That was a very smooth link. You're a pro. I actually wanted to bring this up. This is a project I worked on with the Eyes magazine, and after looking at Tarona's work, I was thinking if I'd have known of your work, I would have wanted you to be a part of this this collection of photographers.
I mean, link me up for the next one.
Yeah, this is something I worked on with the researcher and scholar Taos Domane, who's brilliant, and we were thinking of. She wanted to do a special issue that was all based on Afropean, and the easiest thing to do would be to get black photographers in Europe. Okay, well that's our starting point. But then what? And what? You know, like. It was one thing getting black photographers in Europe just to say we've got some black photographers in Europe together, but like what are black photographers in Europe doing? Like what's the intervention here? And we found that there is a kind of I always think of,
then maybe you can go to the
we
next
can move on.
Go on.
As I was looking at it, we came up with this concept of the B side. So we have the street photography, we have magnum photos, we have, you know, decisive moments, you know, and that's very often when somebody travels the world. Very often a white man travels the world looking for the exotic, looking for neat images, you know, that really don't actually say anything about where they're traveling. We noticed with a lot of the black photographers, when they were dealing with black culture, you could almost feel like the images that they were taking, you could almost find them in the space that was being photographed. You could find them on the floor and you wouldn't surprise you. Almost like a family album type of vibe that you got from these images. And we thought this is like a different way of looking. This is a different way of thinking about what photography is. You know, it's an antithesis to the A side, which is classic documentary photography. It's a different way of looking, in my opinion, and that's what all these artists and there's a kind of texture to all the images as well, which I really get from Tarona's work as well, and montage, messiness, mistakes, blurs. I mean, if we look at this notion of there's this long tradition, actually, especially in the African American tradition, that was set up by Roy DeCarava. There's a signed copy of the Sweet Flypaper of Life at the Black Archives by Langston Hughes, who collaborated with Roy DeCarava, an amazing artifact that they have over there, who was friends with Hermina Hausfeld, who helped us politicize on Suriname. But Roy DeCarava was interested not in light and not in the neutrality. You know, you had these Jenny cards that would favour pale skin as neutral. He was interested in shadows and black skin within shadows and the blurs, and he would often have to hold his breath in these spaces using no flash. He was really looking for the beauty of the low end, the shadow side, the darker end of the scale. And what you get with that is shakes and blurs and mistakes. And if you look at the Kamonge workshop that Roy DeCarava set up, that brought people like Ming Smith through. Ming Smith is another great example of a photographer working with mistakes. And then if you look at Stanley Green, another photographer, and you look at the work that he did in Paris in the 1980s, he describes Roy DeCarava's lineage. He mentions Roy DeCarava, and he talks about this being photography on the edge of failure. And I think there's something that I find within many black photographers, almost like the music. You know, when you listen to, I remember someone saying the thing that's interesting about a group like A Tribe Called Quest is they capture the abstraction and surreality of being black in the West. And I feel like that's what happens with a lot of black photographers who are doing it in an interesting way. They capture something off kilter slightly about the experience of being black in the West.
Thanks. I want to go to 2 questions from the audience, and then I want to. You're going to show us something from your new work, and then we'll finish this evening with another performance, the last performance. So, are there any questions? Oh, and maybe you still have the mic, so Absa, you can. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. Your book was, in a way, self-discovery for you when you traveled through Europe. And you had a specific goal, which you achieved, as you said as well. If you were to take this journey now, what would you be looking for, and how far in the process of self-discovery are you now?
Thanks.
It's a great question. You know, it's quite interesting that I wouldn't take this journey now. And that's why I love seeing other people make similar journeys, but in their own way, because, you know, I have 2 daughters now. I can't go traveling for 6 months. I'm not as intrepid anymore. And I think it did give me a foundation, you know. And it's interesting, I don't think it was a success straightforward in terms of like, I found myself. I actually described the book as a happy failure, you know. It was, Afropean was not what I thought. It wasn't something that was simple. It wasn't this happy family that it was more complicated than that. And actually that is where I found beauty. And that's where, you know, in the disjunction, and I describe it as I mention it at the end of the book, and when I do the reading, as this kind of bricolage of blackness. It was these Afropean shattered into a million pieces, and I pieced it back together, and it never quite fit perfectly again, but in that kind of mosaic of experience, that's something that I find great comfort and consolation in.
Thanks. Another question from the audience? Okay, then maybe you can show us some of your new work. Okay, tell us.
Yeah, so this is the book that's coming out in August. At the end of September. It's called Home is Not a Place, and it's based on partly, our starting point was the Roy DeCarava and Langston Hughes book, Sweet Flypaper of Life. It's a collaboration between a great black photographer and a brilliant poet. And it's this visual journey, free form, inspired by jazz. This body of work is a collaboration with the poet Roger Robinson, Trinidadian dub poet, and we're almost taking dub as the music behind our visuals, and we wanted to do something about Black Britain, and it's like, well, where do we begin with Black Britain? And of a couple of things, one of the big sociological interventions that emerges out of Black Britain is Paul Gilroy, the sociologist's notion of the Black Atlantic. You're speaking about the transatlantic, and I thought very often about the Black Atlantic because I think your DNA map is similar to mine. It's the Black Atlantic, it's the places that light up. It's that what Paul Gilroy might describe as an inverted piece of geography, the place between landmasses where you find a unit of knowledge from the transatlantic slave trade to men and women who would try and get away from restrictive laws on the nation by being seafaring. I mean, that's the story of Otto Hausfeld, who set up the Black Archives. He was escaping what was then Guyana to go to get some work, and then he fled the ship because the captain was a drunkard, and ended up in New York and being a part of the Harlem Renaissance and the politicization of the Harlem Renaissance. So we were interested in, okay, well, what surrounds the UK? The UK is an island, and so our itinerary began in London, and we thought, well, what if we go along the River Thames, and then at the edge of the River Thames, before we get to the sea, you have Gravesend on the one hand, which is where Pocahontas is buried. And then opposite Gravesend, literally a 10-minute across the river, you have Tilbury Docks, which were in 1948, the Empire Windrush docked, which really began what we know now as multicultural Britain. It's where men and women from the Caribbean first docked. Of course, there's a much older black population as well. But then that's usually where the story of Black Britain begins and ends, with the Empire Windrush. And we thought, well, what if we just carry on going around the coast from the mouth of the River Thames? So we followed the coast, and we went to places like Dover, where you have asylum seeking, you have arrivals, you also have deportations of some of the Windrush generation, the big scandal at the moment in the UK. Keep following it around. You have stories emerging out of Plymouth, where British colonialism began in many ways. You have Liverpool, Cardiff, Bristol, where the statue, the Colson statue, was taken down. So you have all these stories from the periphery that rarely get included when people think about Black Britain. And so we travelled the coast, looking at our identity in these places and thinking. I sort of laugh. I say we rented a Mini Cooper to do this journey, a small Mini, traveling around, and we're searching for the promise of black skin in marine light. But with this being Britain, what we found is kente cloth in the fog. That's the colour aesthetic that I actually think about of my images. It's a damped down colour, but a colour that is there nonetheless from the black community, and that's what this journey is all about.
Really looking forward to seeing it. I don't know when it's going to be. Yeah, so it's coming out as a book form in September. I should also mention that I'm working closely with PhotoWorks, a great curator, Shoaib Mavlian, and we're putting on an exhibition in Sheffield. The project's called Home Is Not a Place, and we're turning the gallery, Sheffield is where I'm from, turning the gallery into kind of a home space that will feel home for the black community that I know in the UK. I'm trying to take over that gallery space and put these images up. And then we're going to Edinburgh as well with this exhibition, and then probably somewhere in London. Thank you. Maybe some last words from you, because you said you had 50 things to say. So I don't want to ask a question, because otherwise I may give you the freedom.
I have to pick something from the 50 million thoughts I have. Okay, so my last words would have to be, first of all, what I do want to say is, because you just mentioned the focus on the shadow, the photographer who focused only on shadow. A fun fact, like early rolls of film were actually, the white balance was only focused on white skin. And then my second thought that I have is also when you were talking about your B-side project, what I think is so nice about it, about the philosophy and the notion of it, is that I think that we can do those things because we're not being looked at. In some sense, we're looked at, but we're not necessarily seen. You know what I mean? It's always like, oh, this, black people, like a little bit to the side, especially in photography world. And I think that's why being invisible also gives you freedom, in some sense. Sometimes it's good to be invisible, because when no one is looking at you at that point, you can experiment with everything and anything, and you can create your own world, which is amazing. Now, that is not to say that we should be invisible in larger scales of the world and our struggles and all of these things. But when it comes to experiment, I think that a lot of the times invisibility is such a blessing. When I made those carnival works, for example, nobody knew what the hell I was doing. And then I put them out and people were like, what are you doing? Like, what is this? Where is this going? Like, are you making more? Like, what's happening? I was like, oh God, I started a project that grabbed attention. And now I can't be free anymore in that sense. Now there's an expectation, etc. So sometimes invisibility is a power. And I also want to say that I am very grateful to be here tonight. And I do want to refer back to a moment of your essay, because I think that what you wrote is extremely powerful. And I think that it really resembles a journey that a lot of us are going through, where we don't know where we're coming from, but at least we know where we're going. So thank you for that, and thank you for having me. And thank you, Johny.
Full circle. I think I have to already say thank you for everyone. So thank you so much for Johny Pitts for being here again.
Thank you.
I have to say that if you want to see his pictures, his photographs of the Afropean project that you can go to Black Archives, because there's an exhibition right now. I want to thank Vamba Sherif, and I want to thank Judith Quax, who's now in Dakar, but still I want to thank her. And then I want to ask the musicians to come back on stage again. Lisette Ma Neza, Neil Akenzua, Giovanni Pisas, and Pape Seck, and give you the last sounds and last words, and I'm going to remove myself.
First thing first, you're amazing. Whoa! I want a little more of that. Let's start with an improvisation. So, I just a few days ago, 2 days ago, I don't remember so well. I just came back from a new trip, a new research, but still in Europe, and I'm still a woman of color. And it's for a choreographer. It's not for my own project. And she wanted to go to Italy, to Napoli. And we went there. It was a beautiful city. I had too much Italian food. And then we went a bit out of the beauty. As someone just said, I think you said it even, seeing the struggle in the beauty, actually. Seeing the beauty in the struggle. We went outside of the beauty. We went to a place where there's way more struggle than I thought I would find, where there is a seaside and people come with from different countries, but mostly it were Nigerian and people from Nigeria and Ghana that come with the boat and enter Europe in that way. I want to let you play something of seeking for a better life, but then having a good life, seeking for a better life, but finding misery. For the stories that we found there, we talked with a lot of organizations, a lot of women especially, that came there, that arrived, and then you can start playing, eh? and then when they arrived, someone would say to them like, okay, you just got here, you have to pay back your trip. And someone who just arrives on another continent with no documents anymore, wondering how will I pay this back, and then getting the answer of the only way for you to pay this back, you are a woman, go to the streets, undress yourself and pay us back. We want the money. So yeah, these stories were super heavy. And the whole time I was in this place, and I saw the empty big streets with houses that were left abandoned. It was a weird vibe, but sometimes there was beauty in the struggle, and sometimes there was a family, a daughter that saved the mother's life. But the whole time I felt like I wanted to pray. I felt like, I want to pray. There's something wrong here. So I want you to dance, Giovanni. This feeling of there's something wrong here. I want to pray. And then everywhere where we would go, these institutes, like a person who had an emergency hospital for people with no documents, they were talking in such an academic way, but then at the end of their whole speech they would say, yes, but it's spiritual. And I would be like, what is happening here? But still, we entered a house of a woman. Her name was Sandra, and the Italians were talking about her. Yes, Sandra, a strong woman. Sandra, you have to meet her. And then we met her, and she was telling us her story, her journey, how she got there. And she said the only thing that saved her was her little child. Her little daughter, we saw the child. She's like 1 or 2 years old, and she's always on the phone. The phone is not on, and she's saying, "Daddy, Daddy." But that child saved her life, and I want you to play. I want you to play something that I've heard today, a child being raised by the village, because I saw how sisters, not actual sisters, but found community, found people, places of a home, how they were raising this child and raising each other and being there for each other. There, no, you can do it whenever. Okay. And at some point, the choreographer asked me, "So how does this place feel?" And I wrote it down. It feels like, and then she asked me, what does it taste like? What does it sound like? It tastes like salt, but the salt is gone. Like, how do you salt when there's no salt? And it sounds like, it feels like, it tastes like, it smells like nothing's wrong, but it feels like God. Are you here?
Home is a far place from here. On the other side of the sea, there is everything I know. I've known everything. I know nothing. I've known nothing. I know all now. It feels like motherhood never ending. No, I feel like mothers at the end of their motherhood. A lot of mothers giving back their motherhood. To what? To the sea, perhaps, to the sand, the black sand, the empty houses, perhaps. Daughters. It feels like daughters. It feels like daughters. It feels like daughters giving back their daughterhood. That's what it feels like. It feels like daughters giving back their daughterhood to the womb, to the earth, to God perhaps. It feels like we see that everything used to be something. Yet the churches still are churches, the only intact thing. Yet it feels like God. It feels like God. Are you here? When the priest, the emergency department, and the man who is lost in purpose tells us everything here is spiritual. It feels like God. Are you here? Are you here? And the colors, they turned into non-colors, and the places they turned into non-places. It feels like she asked me, what color does it feel like here? First I say brown, perhaps like the sand. I say, but then I realizes it feels like purple. A bright color, but so in pain, so in vain. It feels like I still wonder if the girls who were cursed to be blind can see now. God, are you here? Are you here? Are you here? Are you here? Are you here?
Brussels, Matonge. Recently voted Europe's most boring capital, it said of Brussels in my Interrail City Guide, had provided me with an empowering, imaginative somewhere to an Afropean conjured by an artist who was fearlessly and eloquently grappled with Belgium's boring was exactly how Brussels wanted to be thought of. It guiltily insists, nothing to see here, that way for chocolates, this way for beer, not mentioning one of the most brutal massacres that has taken place in the last 2 centuries, and an extended period of exploitation. This way for beer, crisis not mentioning one of the most brutal massacres. Over 100,000 that's taken massacred in a 4-year uprising. Massacres that saw the Congo finally win independence place in the last 2 centuries. And the musical and an extended period of exploitation that, among other terms, enabled Belgium to use the best.
The Congo. De Congo is van jou. Wat wil je er nog bij? Ik heb geen vader en geen moederland. Ik heb niet eens een taal. De Congo is van ons geweest en weer terug. Ik heb een huiskamer, een DNA. Ik heb nu zelfs een zus. De Congo is van mij. Rwanda is van mij. Suriname, Indonesië, allemaal van ons. So I remember. Het was een paar jaar geleden, a few years ago. I think a bit before COVID, so like 2019. There was a festival. This was happening in Belgium at the Pukkelpop Festival, and Kendrick Lamar was playing. And there were 2 girls in the audience that look a bit like me. They have the same braids, the same brown to their skin. And a group of white guys goes to them and runs into them, and they start singing. They start singing and screaming, "The Congo is ours. The Congo is ours. Diamanten rapen. The Congo is ours. Handjes kapen. The Congo is van ons. The Congo is van ons." And then I saw that and it went viral because someone filmed it. And I don't know what happened there, but I just kept thinking about that song. How did this song come to life? Like where did it come from? How long has it been alive? Where was it used for? And then I just wanted to answer because the Congo Congo, the Congo, the Congo, the Congo. Is van ons en Senegal, is van ons en Curaçao, is van ons en Mozambique, is van ons en Rwanda is van ons en Burkina Faso is van ons en Ghana is van ons, is van ons, is van ons, is van ons en Ivoorkust is van ons. Thank you. Dank jullie wel. Someone, Johnny said, when we do not know where we're going, maybe that's where our journey begins. I love that. Giovanni, actually I want you to dance that. And I want you to follow his dancing. For me, I thought I knew what I was going to find. But then I found other things. We keep seeking and finding, but I want you to play the things you lost. And I want you to play. I want you to play where you come from. Giovanni, I want you to dance while he plays where you come from. mothers. And we talked about fathers. And we talked about ancestors. And I want to film this. And Neil, I know you are playing what you lost, but what is for you, you will not lose. What is for you, you will not lose. And what is for you, if you've lost it, it will come back. So play something that is for you. You continue. And I want to do a small last poem before we end in a minute. Normally we do this poem on a total different melody in another song, but I came to realize that sometimes the things we seek, they are in people. You know, we seek them in so many different ways and places, and we travel to the other side of the world for them. But sometimes they are found in people that are super close by, or sometimes they are found in people that you meet on the other side of the world, or on the other side of the road, or on the other side of the hill. And you're just talking about something, and in that talking you meet. And we have this song that is about the heart. It's actually his song because it's about his heart. And one time we were talking about all these subjects, and then we started talking about love. And he said, you know, my heart is like a table, and sometimes people leave and people pass away, and we grieve them, but we still have that leftover love. And he says they're still on that table. They still have a seat on that table. And then we go into this song where he plays his heart, and I go like, kom binnen, kom zitten. Kom zitten aan de tafel van mijn hart. Neil, maybe go to the song a bit. Kom binnen. Kom zitten aan de tafel van mijn hart. Kom. Hier is geen afstand. Hier is geen afscheid. Hier is geen spijt. Kom maar binnen. In mijn hartkamer, aan de tafel van mijn hart. Hier zijn geen grenzen. Ik laat je binnen. Ik laat je binnen. Kom zitten aan de tafel van mijn hart. Hier is geen afstand. Hier is geen tijd. Hier is geen afscheid. Hier is geen spijt. Ik laat je binnen. Kom zitten aan de tafel van mijn hart. Er zijn hier mensen en er zijn hier mensen die niet meer. Er zijn hier mensen die niet meer. Hier is geen afstand. Hier is geen spijt. Er is hier liefde. Er is hier zoveel liefde, vrienden, familie, kinderen, vader en moeder van mijn kinderen. Er is hier liefde. Here, there is no distance. Come, sit on the table of my heart. There is no distance. There is no regret. There there is no time. There is no. Hier is geen afstand, hier is geen tijd, hier is geen afscheid, hier is geen spijt, hier is geen afstand, hier is geen afscheid. Hier is geen spijt, hier is geen afstand, hier is geen tijd. And Giovanni, now you're standing in between two continents, in between two directions. You're in between. And you're taking the bus. You don't know, or we don't know, maybe you know. We don't know where this bus is going. Is it going back? Or is it going further? Or is it? You can go to the Afropean vibes that we felt when we arrived here and when we were talking with Johny about it.
The bus I caught to Europa Point had gradually shed all its passengers as the strange familiarity of British-built terrace houses and pubs relented, and the bus ambled up a small road that wasn't designed for a bus here in Gibraltar, and emerged dramatically at the rocky coast, with me as the sole passenger left on board. I'd cut my journey so finely that this bus, which stayed idle at the Europa Point terminus for 12 minutes before making the return journey, was the same bus I needed to be on to make my own return journey. The driver pointed me in the direction of a lighthouse, and I saw that Europa Point was a building site under renovation but deserted by the workers because of the bad weather. I ran through the rain and the greyness, gusts of wind blowing wildly like the impasto brushstrokes of a painter, brooding storm clouds overhead obscuring the spire of the large, modern and impressive Ibrahim al-Ibrahim Mosque, perched dramatically at the edge of this rocky outpost. Everything was monochrome, and I could barely see a few meters in front of me, never mind across the Gibraltar Straits and into Africa. Maybe I'd wanted to feel the proximity of the two continents I felt most connected to. But the more I thought about it, looking out at sea, being drenched by fatefully bad weather, amid unglamorous scaffolding and dormant work tools, the more I realised I didn't need to see the landmass of Africa looming emblematically in the distance to end my travels, because Africa was right where I was standing. All this time it had been dominated by nostalgic imperial iconography, much like Black Sheffield and other such areas in Europe, hadn't been exported. This created the illusion that Black Europe was a place without culture, history or geography, which, as I'd now seen firsthand, I knew was utterly untrue. As well as experiencing the Black European landscape, I'd connected with the knowledge production of its myriad communities, learned about bold and empowering Black and working class traditions that had been kept at a distance from my whole life, despite being Black and working class. These scattered fragments of Afropean experience had formed a mosaic inside my mind, not monolithic, but not entirely amorphous either. Rather, the Afropean reality was a bricolage of Blackness, and I'd experienced an Africa that was both in and of Europe. I looked once more into the fog hanging over the sea, obscuring Africa, and closed my eyes for a moment to feel its presence as the wild surf spritzed my face. Then, turning around to face this tumultuous old continent of Europe, where I'd been born and raised, I went back to where I came from.